Commander Jake Harrison stood in the command center of the UES Defender, staring at the strange message that had just arrived from deep space. The transmission came from somewhere beyond the outer rim of known space, and it was not human. The alien symbols moved across the screen like living things, pulsing with an urgent rhythm that made his stomach turn. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez worked at her console, her fingers dancing across the controls as she tried to decode the message. She had been working on alien languages for years, but this was different. The patterns were complex, almost desperate in their repetition. After 3 hours of careful analysis, she finally looked up at Harrison with wide eyes. "Commander, I think I have it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are asking for help." Dr. Ben Carter joined them at the main display, his scientific mind already racing with possibilities. He had studied theoretical xenobiology for decades, but actual contact with alien life had always seemed like a distant dream. Now that dream was becoming reality, and it was more terrifying than he had ever imagined. The message continued to play, and slowly the meaning became clear. The beings calling themselves the Zephyrian Empire were at war with something called the Devourers. These Devourers were moving through space like a plague, consuming entire worlds and leaving nothing behind. The Zephyrians had been fighting them for decades, but they were losing. "Show me their location," Harrison ordered, and Rodriguez brought up a star map on the main screen. The Zephyrian Empire was located in a cluster of systems about 50 light-years. From Earth, between them and the human colonies lay a vast stretch of empty space, but Harrison could see the threat clearly. If the Devourers defeated the Zephyrians, Earth would be directly in their path. What do we know about these Zephyrians? Harrison asked Dr. Carter. The scientist pulled up his analysis on a side screen. Based on their transmission patterns and the little biological data they included, they appear to be an insect-like species. They are much larger than humans, possibly 8 to 10 feet tall. They have multiple arms, natural armor plating, and what appears to be advanced biotechnology. Harrison studied the rough images that had been included with the message. The Zephyrians looked like something from a nightmare. Their bodies were covered in dark, chitinous plates that gleamed like black metal. They had 4 arms, each ending in clawed hands that could apparently interface directly with their technology. Their heads were elongated, with massive compound eyes that seemed to see in all directions at once. "They look like monsters," Rodriguez said quietly, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Maybe so," Harrison replied, "but they are monsters asking for our help against something even worse." The transmission continued, and War General Lexfer introduced himself as the leader of the Zephyrian military forces. His voice was a series of clicks and buzzes that the translation software converted into rough English. He spoke of battles fought across a dozen star systems, of worlds stripped bare by the devourer swarms, of billions of his people already lost to the endless hunger of their enemy. "The devourers do not negotiate," Lexfer explained. "They do not take prisoners. They consume everything organic and leave only dead rock behind. We have fought them for 47 of your Earth years, and we are failing. Our projections show that they will overrun our final defenses within 6 months." Harrison felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The Zephyrians were offering to share their technology and battle experience in exchange for human military support. It was a chance to gain allies and advanced weapons, but it would also mean going to war against an enemy that had already proven capable of defeating a species far more advanced than humanity. "What do you think, Doctor?" Harrison asked Carter. "Their biotechnology is centuries ahead of ours," Carter replied. "Even their basic weapon systems are more advanced than anything we have. If we could learn from them, it might give us the edge we need to defend Earth when the Devourers come." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "The math is simple, Commander. If the Zephyrians fall, we face the Devourers alone. If we help them now, we have a chance to stop the threat before it reaches human space." Harrison looked around the command center. At his crew? These were good people, trained soldiers and scientists who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity. Now he was asking them to risk everything on an alliance with creatures that looked like something from their worst nightmares. "Send a reply to War General Lexver," Harrison ordered. "Tell him that Earth accepts his alliance. We will meet his fleet at the coordinates he provided." As Rodriguez began composing the response, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. The Zephyrians were clearly desperate, and desperate allies could be dangerous. But the alternative was to wait for the Devourers to finish their current enemies and then come for Earth, within hours. The UES Defender and her escort ships were preparing to jump to hyperspace. The crew worked with nervous efficiency, knowing that they were about to enter a war that had already lasted longer than human civilization had existed. They would be fighting alongside aliens who looked like monsters, against an enemy that had proven unstoppable. Harrison stood at the observation deck, watching the stars prepare to blur into hyperspace. In a few days, they would meet the Zephyrians, face to face. He wondered if his crew would be able to work with beings so alien, so frightening in appearance. He wondered if humanity had anything to offer in a war that had already consumed half the galaxy. Most of all, he wondered if they would survive long enough to find out. The first meeting between humans and Zephyrians took place in the cargo bay of the UES Defender, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Captain Lisa Morgan stood at attention as the alien delegation entered through the airlock, but she had to fight every instinct in her body to keep from reaching for her weapon. War General Lexver was even more terrifying in person than in the transmission. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his black chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh lights of the cargo bay. His 4 arms moved independently, each one ending in clawed hands that clicked against his weapons as he walked. His compound eyes swept the room, taking in every detail of the human soldiers standing before him. "You are smaller than I expected," Lexver said, his translated voice carrying a tone of disappointment. "How do such fragile creatures expect to survive in battle?" "Commander." Harrison stepped forward, trying to project confidence despite feeling like a child next to the massive alien. "We may be smaller, but we are here to fight alongside you against the Devourers." The Zephyrian general made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter, but it sounded more like grinding metal. "Fight alongside us? You will be fortunate. If you can avoid being killed by accident in your first engagement." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sergeant Ryan Brooks watched the alien warriors behind Lexver, noting how they held their weapons casually but ready. Each Zephyrian carried multiple energy weapons built into their armor and integrated with their natural biology. They looked like living war machines, bred for nothing but combat. Dr. Carter tried to break the tension by focusing on the scientific aspects of their meeting. "General, we are very interested in learning about your biotechnology. Perhaps we could begin with some basic exchanges of information." Lexver turned his massive head toward the human scientist, studying him with those unblinking compound eyes. "Your technology is primitive, but perhaps it has some small value. We will share what we must to make you minimally useful in battle." The words stung, but Harrison knew they needed to establish some kind of working relationship. "We would like to begin joint training exercises immediately. Our tactical officers need to learn how to coordinate with your forces." "Very well," Lexver agreed. "But do not expect us to slow our warriors down to accommodate your limitations. War does not wait for the weak to catch up." The first training session was a disaster. Captain Morgan found herself trying to coordinate human and Zephyrian squads in a simulated battle scenario, but the two species fought in completely different ways. The Zephyrians charged directly at their targets, relying on their natural armor and superior firepower to overwhelm the enemy. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, their multiple arms allowing them to fire weapons in all directions simultaneously. Sergeant Brooks was paired with a Zephyrian warrior named Kethser, who stood over him like a tower of living armor. The alien made no attempt to coordinate with Brooks, instead rushing ahead into the simulation with weapons blazing. Brooks tried to provide covering fire, but Kethser was already deep in enemy territory, fighting with a savage fury that left no room for human tactics. "Your cowardice will get us both killed," Kethser clicked at Brooks after the simulation ended. Why do you hide behind cover when you should be destroying the enemy? We use cover to stay alive long enough to complete the mission, Brooks replied, trying to keep his anger in check. Charging blindly into enemy fire is suicide. Better to die fighting than to cower like prey animals, Kethser responded. His weapons already powering up for the next exercise. Dr. Carter spent his time studying the Zephyrian biotechnology, amazed by its sophistication. Their weapons were living things, grown rather than built, and they bonded with their users on a genetic level. The aliens could interface directly with their equipment through neural links, making them incredibly fast and accurate in combat. It's remarkable, Carter explained to Harrison during a break between exercises. They have evolved alongside their technology for thousands of years. Their entire biology is designed for war. What about us? Harrison asked. What do we bring to this alliance? Carter paused, considering the question. Honestly, Commander, I'm not sure. They are stronger, faster, better armed, and more experienced. We seem to be the junior partners in every way. The second day of training went no better than the first. Engineer Kate Sullivan watched the Zephyrians demonstrate their heavy weapons, energy cannons that could punch through starship armor with ease. Their personal shields could deflect anything in the human arsenal, and their reflexes were so fast that they could dodge incoming fire with casual ease. How are we supposed to fight alongside them? Sullivan asked Morgan. They operate on a completely different level than we do. We'll figure it out, Morgan replied, but her voice lacked conviction. She had been watching the aliens fight, and their casual brutality was disturbing. They showed no mercy to simulated enemies, no concern for collateral damage, no interest in taking prisoners or gathering intelligence. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Rodriguez noticed something during the tactical planning sessions. The Zephyrians were incredibly effective fighters, but they were also incredibly predictable. They used the same strategies over and over, relying on overwhelming force rather than creativity or adaptation. They're too rigid, Rodriguez explained to Harrison. They have one way of fighting, and they stick to it no matter what. That might work against most enemies, but the Devourers have been adapting to their tactics for decades. Harrison nodded, beginning to see the potential. And humans? We adapt constantly, Rodriguez said. We change our plans based on new information. We improvise when things go wrong. We find new solutions to old problems. That's something they don't seem to do. The third day of training brought the first real test. A Devourer scouting force had been detected approaching the system, and both human and Zephyrian forces would need to work together to repel them. The aliens were confident, having fought these scouts many times before. The Devourers send scouts to test our defenses, Vexver explained. They are weak individually, but they learn from each encounter. We must destroy them quickly before they can report back to the main force. The battle began exactly as the Zephyrians predicted. The Devourer ships were strange, organic things that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. They moved and coordinated. Swarms probing for weaknesses in the defensive formation. The Zephyrians responded with their standard tactics, forming a battle line and pouring fire into the enemy ranks. At first, the plan worked perfectly. The Devourer scouts were taking heavy casualties, their organic hulls no match for Zephyrian energy weapons, but then something changed. The surviving scouts began to move differently, adapting their formation to minimize losses. They had learned from the initial engagement and were already adjusting their tactics. The Zephyrians continued their attack, but their effectiveness was declining rapidly. The Devourers were evolving their defenses in real time, and the rigid alien battle plan could not adjust fast enough to compensate. Captain Morgan watched from her command post as the tide of battle began to turn. They're learning too fast, she reported to Harrison. The Zephyrians are losing their advantage. Harrison made a decision that would change everything. All human units break formation and engage with independent tactics. Improvise as needed. The human ships scattered from the main battle line, each one following its own plan. They hit the Devourers from unexpected angles, used unconventional weapons, and changed their attack patterns constantly. The scouts could not adapt fast enough to counter the chaotic human assault. Within minutes, the remaining Devourers were destroyed. The Zephyrians stared in amazement at the small human fleet, trying to understand what had just happened. Their mighty war machines had been failing against an enemy they had fought for decades, but these tiny, weak creatures had found a way to win. The HFY's voice came over the communication channel, and for the first time, it carried a note of respect. Perhaps these humans are not as useless as they appear. Major Alex Turner took command of the newly formed Combined Strike Force just as the warning sirens began to wail throughout the fleet. The Devourers had launched a massive assault on Proxima Station, a mining world that supplied rare metals to both human and Zephyrian forces. This would be the first real test of their alliance, and everyone knew the stakes were higher than ever before. Turner stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the tactical display as hundreds of Devourer vessels emerged from hyperspace around the mining world. These were not the small scouts they had fought before, but massive bioships that pulsed with organic energy. Each one was the size of a human cruiser, but they moved with the fluid grace of living creatures. War General Vexver appeared on the communication screen, his compound eyes reflecting the glow of weapon systems powering up around him. "The enemy has brought their adaptation ships," he said, his translated voice carrying notes of both anger and concern. "These vessels learn from our attacks and change their defenses accordingly. We must strike hard and fast before they can fully adapt." The Zephyrian battle plan was simple and direct, exactly what Turner had come to expect from his alien allies. The massive war fleet would form a traditional battle line and pour concentrated fire into the enemy formation. It was a strategy that had worked against countless opponents over the centuries, and the Zephyrians had complete confidence in their approach. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez monitored the enemy formations from her position at the sensor station. "Major, the Devourer ships are spreading out in a defensive pattern. They seem to be waiting for us to make the first move." Turner nodded, watching as the Zephyrian forces moved into their attack formation. The alien ships were impressive, each one a work of biological art that combined living tissue with advanced technology. Their weapons were capable of cracking planets, and their shields could deflect almost any conventional attack. The battle began with a thunderous exchange of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Zephyrian energy beams struck the Devourer bioships with devastating force, tearing through their organic hulls and sending pieces of alien flesh spinning into the void. For the first few minutes, it looked like the traditional tactics would carry the day, but then the Devourer ships began to change. Their hulls grew thicker where the energy beams struck, developing new types of armor that could absorb and redirect. Zephyrian weapons. The bioships that had been taking heavy damage suddenly became much harder to hurt, their adaptive capabilities working faster than anyone had expected. Captain Lisa Morgan watched from her position in the human formation. As the Zephyrian advance began to slow, "They're adapting to our allies' weapons," she reported to Turner. "The energy beams are becoming less effective with each passing minute." Vexver's voice came over the communication channel, and for the first time since Turner had known him, the alien general sounded uncertain. "The enemy adaptation is proceeding faster than our models predicted. We must increase our rate of fire to overcome their defenses." The Zephyrian ships responded by pouring even more energy into their attacks, but the result was exactly what the Devourers wanted. Each blast of energy gave the bioships more information about the weapons being used against them, allowing them to adapt their defenses even more quickly. Sergeant Ryan Brooks found himself fighting alongside Kethser again, this time in a boarding action against one of the smaller Devourer vessels. The alien warrior moved with his usual brutal efficiency, his multiple arms wielding energy weapons that cut through the organic corridors like hot knives through butter. But something was wrong. The Devourer drones they encountered were different from the ones described in the intelligence reports. These creatures had thick, energy-resistant hides that could deflect Zephyrian weapons. They moved with coordinated precision, adapting their tactics to counter the alien boarding party. They are learning from our previous encounters. Kethser clicked in frustration as his weapons proved less effective than expected. Each battle teaches them how to fight us better. Brooks pulled out his human plasma rifle and began firing at the Devourer drones, surprised to see that his weapon was still effective. They haven't adapted to our weapons yet, he realized. We're still new to them. The insight spread quickly through the human forces. While the Devourers had been fighting Zephyrians for decades and had learned to counter their tactics, they had no experience with human weapons and strategies. Dr. Ben Carter monitored the battle from his research station, analyzing the enemy adaptation patterns. The bioships are focused on countering Zephyrian energy weapons, Carter reported to Turner. Our kinetic weapons and missile systems are still causing significant damage. Turner made a decision that would change the course of the battle. All human units break from the main formation and engage with independent attack patterns. Use whatever weapons and tactics you think will work. The human ships scattered from the rigid battle line, each one following its own path toward the enemy. Pilot Officer Chris Davis led a squadron of fighters in a series of impossible maneuvers, weaving between the massive bioships and striking at vulnerable points that the Zephyrians had never thought to target. Davis had always been considered a reckless pilot by human standards, but his willingness to take calculated risks proved invaluable against an enemy that relied on predictable attack patterns. He dove his fighter through gaps in the Devourer formation that were barely wider than his ship, emerging behind enemy lines to strike at their command vessels. The Zephyrians watched in amazement as the small human fighters accomplished things that their massive warships could not. Davis and his squadron were not stronger or better armed than the alien pilots, but they were willing to try things that no rational warrior would consider. Engineer Kate Sullivan had been working on hybrid weapons that combined human and Zephyrian technology, and the battle provided the perfect test for her innovations. Her modified torpedo systems used human guidance computers with Zephyrian bio-warheads, creating weapons that could change their attack patterns in flight. The hybrid systems are working, Sullivan reported as her torpedoes struck a massive bioship that had been adapting to conventional weapons. The Devourers can't adapt to attacks that keep changing. The tide of battle began to turn as more human units joined the assault. They used tactics that the Zephyrians had never seen before, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, and changing their approach whenever the enemy began to adapt. The rigid alien battle plan gave way to fluid chaos that the Devourers could not predict or counter. Captain Morgan led a group of human cruisers in a coordinated strike against the largest Devourer bioship, but instead of the direct assault that Zephyrians would have used, she ordered her ships to fire at seemingly random intervals. The bioship tried to adapt to the attack pattern, but there was no pattern to adapt to. Human tactical thinking is fundamentally different from ours, Vixver observed as he watched the battle unfold. They do not follow logical patterns that can be predicted or countered. The Devourer bioships, faced with an enemy that refused to fight in predictable ways, began to retreat from the battle. Their adaptation systems were overwhelmed by the constant changes in human tactics, and they could not develop effective countermeasures against weapons and strategies that kept evolving. Turner watched from his command ship as the enemy formation broke apart, the massive bioships fleeing back into hyperspace. The mining world was saved, but more importantly, they had discovered something that could change the entire war. General Vexver, Turner said over the communication channel, I think we need to discuss some changes to our battle tactics. The Zephyrian leader's compound eyes fixed on the human major, and for the first time Turner saw something that looked like respect in that alien gaze. Yes, Major Turner. I believe we have much to learn from your people. As the combined fleet regrouped around Proxima Station, both humans and Zephyrians knew that something fundamental had changed. The small, weak creatures that the aliens had dismissed as barely useful had proven that strength was not always measured in armor and weapons. Sometimes the greatest power came from the ability to think in ways that no enemy could predict. Intelligence Officer Nina Parker stared at the captured Devourer biodata flowing across her screen, her face growing pale as the translation program slowly revealed the truth. She had been working for 3 days straight, trying to decode the organic information systems that the enemy used instead of conventional computers. What she found was far worse than anyone had imagined. The Devourers were not the ultimate enemy. They were running from something else. Something so terrible that it had driven them to consume entire galaxies in their desperate flight. The biodata contained fragmentary records of their original homeworld, destroyed by entities that the translation software could only render as the Silence. Parker called for Dr. Ben Carter and Commander Jake Harrison immediately. When they arrived at her station, she played back the decoded messages, her voice shaking as she explained what she had learned. "They are not conquerors," she said. "They are refugees. The Devourers are fleeing something that makes them look harmless by comparison." Carter studied the alien data streams, his scientific mind trying to process the implications. According to this, the Silence destroyed the Devourer homeworld and 17 other systems before the survivors escaped. The Devourers have been running ever since, consuming other worlds to fuel their flight. Harrison felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what this meant. If the Devourers are running from something worse and they are heading toward human space, then we are directly in the path of both threats. The revelation came at the worst possible time. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Devourer fleet approaching the Centauri Nebula, where the combined human-Zephyrian forces had established their main defensive line. This was not another scouting force or raiding party, but the main enemy fleet that had been consuming worlds for decades. War General Vexfer was confident as he deployed his forces for the coming battle. The Zephyrian Empire had been preparing for this moment for years, building massive war vessels specifically designed to fight the Devourer hive ships. Each alien battleship was a masterpiece of biological engineering, capable of cracking moons and shielding entire fleets. "Today we end this war," Vexfer announced to the combined fleet. "The Devourer hive ships are massive, but they are not invincible. Our bioenergy cannons will tear through their hulls, and our warriors will board their vessels to destroy them from within." The enemy fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything that had been seen before. The hive ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon and pulsing with organic energy. They moved through space like living creatures, their hulls covered in what looked like scales that shifted and changed color as they approached the defensive line. Major Alex Turner watched from his command ship as the Zephyrian fleet opened fire with everything they had. The bioenergy cannons that had proven so effective against smaller Devourer ships unleashed their full power against the hive ships. Beams of pure energy that could vaporize asteroids striking the massive enemy vessels, but the hive ships barely seemed to notice the attacks. Their adaptive hulls absorbed the energy and redirected it, glowing brighter with each impact but showing no signs of damage. The weapons that had been designed specifically to destroy them were having no effect at all. "Impossible!" Vexfera's voice came over the communication channel, filled with disbelief. "Our calculations showed that concentrated fire from the entire fleet should penetrate their defenses." The Devourer response was swift and devastating. Each hive ship opened like a flower, releasing clouds of smaller vessels that swarmed toward the Allied fleet. These were not the scouts they had fought before, but true war drones, each one the size of a human destroyer and armed with weapons that could adapt to any defense. Sergeant Ryan Brooks found himself fighting alongside a wounded Zephyrian warrior named Vexthul in the corridors of their damaged ship. The alien had lost 2 of his 4 arms to Devourer weapons, but he continued to fight with the same brutal efficiency that characterized his species. "Your people fight strangely," Vexthul clicked as Brooks dragged him to safety behind a damaged bulkhead. "You risk your life to save a wounded enemy." "You are not my enemy," Brooks replied, checking his weapon as more Devourer drones approached their position. "We are fighting the same war." The alien warrior studied the human with his compound eyes, seeing something that he had never noticed before. "You would die to protect me, even though I am not of your species." Brooks nodded, then opened fire on the approaching drones. That is what humans do. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. The battle was going badly for the Allied forces. The Zephyrian battle line was breaking apart under the assault of the Devourer swarms, and their mighty warships were being overwhelmed by enemies that seemed to pour endlessly from the hive ships. Commander, Harrison realized that conventional tactics were useless against an enemy of this magnitude. The Devourers had been preparing for this battle for decades, adapting their forces specifically to counter Zephyrian weapons and strategies. Only something completely unexpected could turn the tide. Harrison made a decision that horrified his alien allies. He ordered all human vessels to implement Protocol Omega, a desperate strategy that had been developed as a last resort. The human ships would overload their power cores and use themselves as kinetic weapons against the hive ships. "You cannot be serious," Dexter said when he heard the plan. "That is suicide. Your vessels will be destroyed and your crews will die." "Maybe," Harrison replied, "but it might be the only way to hurt them." Captain Lisa Morgan volunteered to lead the first suicide run, manually piloting her cruiser toward the largest hive ship while her crew evacuated to escape pods. She had spent years training for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of flying directly into the heart of an enemy fleet. The hive ship tried to adapt its defenses to the incoming human vessel, but there was no defense against a ship that was designed to explode on impact. Morgan's cruiser struck the alien vessel at full speed, her overloaded power core detonating with the force of a small nuclear weapon. For the first time in the battle, a hive ship showed damage. The explosion tore a massive hole in its hull, and organic fluid began pouring out into space. The other hive ships recoiled from the attack, their adaptive systems struggling to process what had just happened. "It worked," Turner reported in amazement. The kinetic impact bypassed their adaptive defenses entirely. More human ships began their suicide runs, each one guided by a volunteer crew member while the others escaped to safety. The Zephyrians watched in horror and growing respect as human after human sacrificed themselves to damage the enemy fleet. Dr. Carter made his own sacrifice in the research laboratory, working frantically to develop a weapon that could disrupt the Devourer hive mind. He had been studying captured biotechnology for weeks, looking for weaknesses in their organic systems. As Devourer forces overran the laboratory, Carter injected his experimental virus directly into the enemy neural network. The process exposed him to lethal biotoxins, but his sacrifice disrupted the coordination between the hive ships, causing them to attack each other in confusion. "The humans fight like madmen," Vexthal observed as he watched the suicide attacks from the medical bay. "They throw away their lives as if they mean nothing." Sergeant Brooks helped the wounded alien to a safer position, then looked back at the battle raging outside. "Our lives mean everything to us," he said. "That is why we are willing to give them up for something more important." The Zephyrian warrior did not understand the human concept of sacrifice for others, but he was beginning to recognize its power. These small, fragile creatures possessed something that his mighty species lacked: the ability to find hope in hopeless situations and fight beyond all reasonable limits. The battle continued to rage around the nebula, but something fundamental had changed. The Devourers were no longer advancing with their previous confidence, and the hive ships were showing real damage for the first time. The human sacrifice had given the Allied forces a chance to regroup and plan their next move. War General Lexver contacted Harrison on the communication channel, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and confusion. "Your people fight in ways that defy all logic and reason. How do you find the strength to continue when victory seems impossible?" Harrison looked out at the stars where his friends had died, then turned back to the alien general. "Because giving up is not an option. As long as one human remains alive, we will keep fighting." The true scope of human determination became clear when Captain Lisa Morgan guided her damaged cruiser through the Devourer defenses for the third time that day. Her ship was barely holding together, its hull breached in dozens of places and its crew reduced to half their original number. Yet she continued to fight, leading her vessel in another desperate assault against the massive hive-ships. Morgan had volunteered for the suicide mission hours ago, but something had changed in the battle. The other human captains were following her example, turning their ships into weapons and striking at the enemy with a fury that amazed their Zephyrian allies. Each attack cost lives, but each attack also brought them closer to victory. All power? To forward shields, Morgan ordered her remaining crew as they approached the largest hive ship. We are going to ram them again, and this time we are not pulling back. The Zephyrians had been fighting wars for centuries, but they had never seen anything like this. Their warriors were brave and skilled, but they fought with calculated precision, weighing risks and benefits before making each move. The humans fought with something that defied calculation, a willingness to die for victory that went beyond military training. War General Vexfer watched from his command ship as Morgan's cruiser struck the hive ship's weakened hull, her overloaded engines exploding in a burst of light that could be seen across the battlefield. The explosion tore another massive hole in the enemy vessel, and for the first time in the war, a hive ship began to list and lose power. The humans are destroying themselves to defeat us, Vexfer said to his officers, his translated voice carrying notes of confusion and growing respect. They fight as if death means nothing to them. But death meant everything to the humans, which was exactly why they were willing to face it. Each sacrifice was made with full knowledge of its cost, and each volunteer understood exactly what they were giving up. They fought not because life was cheap, but because some things were worth more than life itself. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez had taken command of the surviving human forces after Commander Harrison's ship was destroyed in the opening hours of the battle. She stood on the bridge of her damaged vessel, coordinating attacks with both human and Zephyrian units while explosions lit up the space around her. All remaining ships form up on my position, Rodriguez ordered. We are going to try something that has never been done before. The plan that Rodriguez had developed was insane by any rational military standard. She wanted to combine human unpredictability with Zephyrian firepower, creating a joint assault that would use both species' strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. The strategy required perfect timing and trust between OIs who had been fighting together for only a few months. Engineer Kate Sullivan had been working around the clock to modify the remaining human weapons, combining their technology with captured devourer biosystems to create hybrid weapons that could adapt even faster than the enemy. Her innovations were untested and dangerous, but they represented the only hope of penetrating the hive ship's defenses. The hybrid systems are ready, Sullivan reported to Rodriguez, but I have to warn you, they might explode in our faces. We are combining technologies that were never meant to work together. Then we will die trying something new instead of dying doing something old, Rodriguez replied. All units, prepare for a final assault. The combined fleet moved forward in a formation that would have horrified military strategists from both species. Human ships darted between the massive Zephyrian war vessels, their smaller size allowing them to strike at targets that the aliens could not reach. The Zephyrians provided covering fire with their bioenergy cannons, creating gaps in the enemy defenses that the humans could exploit. Sergeant Ryan Brooks found himself fighting alongside Vextel again, but this time the wounded Zephyrian was following his lead instead of the other way around. The alien warrior had learned to fight like a human, using cover and tactical thinking instead of relying purely on superior strength and armor. Your people have changed us, Vextel said as they moved through the corridors of a damaged devourer. Vessel, we no longer fight like Zephyrians. We fight like humans. Brooks looked at his alien companion, noting how the warrior's fighting style had evolved over the course of the battle. Maybe that is what we were meant to do. Not just fight together, but learn from each other. The boarding action was successful, but at a terrible cost. Half the human Marines were killed or wounded, and even more Zephyrians had fallen to the adaptive devourer defenses. But they had managed to plant explosive charges in the hive ship's core systems, and the massive vessel was beginning to break apart from within. Dr. Carter's virus had spread throughout the devourer fleet. disrupting their coordination and causing confusion among the hive ships. The enemy vessels were no longer working together effectively, and their adaptive defenses were becoming less coordinated with each passing minute, but the virus was also killing Carter. The biotoxins that he had absorbed during the injection process were slowly shutting down his organs, and the medical team could do nothing to stop the process. He spent his final hours analyzing the enemy biotechnology, looking for additional weaknesses that could be exploited. The Devourers are not truly alive, Carter explained to Rodriguez during one of his brief moments of clarity. They are biological machines, created by something else for a specific purpose. If we can disrupt their programming, we can stop them entirely. The breakthrough came when Sullivan combined Carter's research with her hybrid weapons technology. The new systems could not only adapt to enemy defenses, but they could also inject disruptive code into the Devourer biosystems. Each hit would weaken the enemy's ability to coordinate and adapt. "It is working," Vexver reported as the tide of battle began to turn. "The hive ships are becoming less effective with each attack. Their adaptation systems are failing." The final assault was a masterpiece of cooperation between two species that had learned to fight as one. Human vessels darted through the Devourer formations, their hybrid weapons spreading Carter's virus throughout the enemy fleet. Zephyrian warships provided massive firepower support, their bioenergy cannons exploiting the weaknesses that the humans had created. Major Alex Turner, fighting from a borrowed Zephyrian vessel after his own ship was destroyed, coordinated the final push against the largest hive ship. The massive enemy vessel was still functional, but its adaptive defenses were weakening under the constant assault of weapons that changed their attack patterns faster than it could compensate. "All units, concentrate fire on the primary target," Turner ordered. "We end this now." The combined fleet poured everything they had into the assault on the command hive ship. Human weapons struck at vulnerable points while Zephyrian cannons provided overwhelming firepower. The enemy vessel tried to adapt, but the virus in its systems was preventing effective coordination. The hive ship's death was spectacular. Its organic hull began to convulse as the biosystems failed, and massive sections of the vessel broke away and drifted into space. The other hive ships, cut off from their command vessel, began to retreat toward the edge of the system. "They are running," Rodriguez reported, hardly believing what she was seeing. "The Devourers are actually retreating." But the victory had come at a terrible cost. Hundreds of human vessels had been destroyed, and thousands of crew members had given their lives in the battle. The Zephyrian losses were equally severe, with many of their greatest warships reduced to floating debris. Vexver contacted Rodriguez on the communication channel, his voice carrying a respect that had been absent at the beginning of their alliance. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, your people have shown us something that we have forgotten. There is more to war than strength and weapons." Rodriguez looked around her damaged bridge, seeing the faces of her surviving crew members. They were exhausted, wounded, and traumatized by the battle, but they were also victorious. They had faced an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy, and they had won. "What have we shown you, General?" Rodriguez asked. "That the greatest weapon is not the one that can destroy worlds," Vexver replied. "It is the one that can inspire others to fight beyond their limits. Your people do not just fight for victory, you fight for hope." The Devourer fleet was in full retreat, but Rodriguez knew that this was not the end of the war. The enemy would regroup, adapt to their new tactics, and return stronger than before. But something had changed in the battle above the Centauri. Nebula. Something that would affect the outcome of every future engagement. The Zephyrians had learned to fight like humans, and the humans had learned to fight like Zephyrians. Together, they had become something greater than either species could be alone. The monsters that had once seemed so frightening were now trusted allies, and the weak humans had proven that true strength came not from armor and weapons, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, both species believed that victory was possible. The final battle for Earth began when the largest Devourer fleet ever assembled emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the sensor displays as thousands of enemy vessels spread across the darkness between the stars. The odds were 10,000 to 1 against the combined human-Zephyrian fleet. But nobody spoke of surrender. War General Vexver appeared on the communication screen, his scarred exoskeleton bearing the marks of countless battles fought alongside his human allies. The proud alien warrior who had once dismissed humans as weak and useless now looked to Rodriguez for guidance in the coming fight. "The enemy has brought everything they have," Vexver said, his translated voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. "Every hive ship, every bioweapon, every adaptive system they have developed over decades of conquest. They mean to end this war today?" Rodriguez nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the approaching enemy fleet. The Devourers had learned from their previous defeats, adapting their strategies to counter the combined tactics that had proven so effective. Their ships moved in new formations, their weapons had been redesigned to counter human unpredictability, and their biosystems had been upgraded to resist the viral attacks that had disrupted their coordination. "They have adapted to everything we have thrown at them," Rodriguez observed. "But we have adapted too." The truth was evident throughout the combined fleet. Human ships now carried Zephyrian bioweapons alongside their traditional armaments, while alien vessels had been modified with human guidance systems and adaptive targeting computers. Engineer Kate Sullivan's hybrid technologies had evolved far beyond her original designs, creating weapons that could change their fundamental nature during combat. Major Alex Turner coordinated the defense from his position aboard a Zephyrian warship, his human crew working seamlessly alongside alien warriors who had learned to fight with human creativity and determination. The integration between the two species had become so complete that it was often difficult to tell where human tactics ended and Zephyrian strategy began. "All units, prepare for engagement," Turner ordered as the enemy fleet approached the outer planets. "Remember, we are not just fighting for Earth or the Zephyrian Empire. We are fighting for the future of every species in the galaxy." The battle began with the Devourers launching a coordinated assault on the asteroid belt, using their bioweapons to consume the rocky debris and convert it into additional ships and weapons. The enemy's ability to adapt and grow during combat had always been their greatest advantage, and they were using it to maximum effect, but the combined fleet was ready for this tactic. Human-designed mining charges had been hidden throughout the asteroid field, each one programmed to detonate when Devourer biosystems attempted to consume the surrounding rock. The explosions tore through the enemy advance guard, disrupting their formation and destroying dozens of smaller vessels. "First blood to us," Rodriguez reported, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. The Devourers had expected the trap and had accepted the losses as part of their strategy. The main enemy fleet continued its advance toward Mars, where the primary defensive line had been established. Sergeant Ryan Brooks fought alongside Vexthal in the defense of Mars Station, their partnership now so seamless that they seemed to share a single mind. The wounded Zephyrian warrior had long since recovered from his injuries, but the scars he bore were badges of honor earned fighting beside his human friend. "The enemy drones are different this time," Vexthal observed as they repelled another boarding attack. "They move like humans now, unpredictably and with individual initiative." Brooks nodded grimly as he reloaded his weapon. "They have been studying us as much as we have been studying them. They know our strengths and weaknesses." The realization was spreading throughout the fleet. The Devourers had not just adapted their technology to counter human tactics, they had begun to think like humans. Their bioships now used creative maneuvers instead of rigid formations. Their weapons changed unpredictably during combat, and their strategies incorporated the same chaotic elements that had made human tactics so effective. "They are fighting like us," Turner reported to Rodriguez, "but they are still missing something essential." The missing element became clear as the battle intensified around Earth itself. The Devourer fleet had successfully adapted to human tactics. and technology, but they could not replicate the human spirit that drove those tactics. They fought with learned creativity, but not with the desperate hope that gave humans their greatest strength. Dr. Carter's sacrifice had provided the key insight that would determine the outcome of the war. His research into devourer biotechnology had revealed that they were not truly alive, but rather biological machines created by their unknown masters for a specific purpose. They could adapt and learn, but they could not truly understand the emotions that drove human behavior. Sullivan's final innovation combined this insight with her hybrid weapons technology. The new systems did not just attack the enemy's physical defenses, they targeted the programming that made the devourers function. Each hit carried a payload of pure human emotion, hope, determination, love, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. "It is working," Dexver reported as the enemy fleet began to show signs of confusion. "The devourers are losing their coordination again, but this time it is different. They are not just disrupted, they are changing." The change was subtle at first, but it spread quickly through the enemy fleet. Devourer bioships began to break away from their formations, their crews apparently developing individual personalities and motivations. The hive mind that had driven them for centuries was fragmenting as human emotions infected their biological programming. "They are becoming individuals," Rodriguez realized. "The virus is not just disrupting their coordination, it is giving them free will." The battle took on a surreal quality as some devourer vessels began to attack their own fleet, their crews apparently rebelling against the hive mind's control. Others simply stopped fighting, drifting in space as their biosystems struggled to process the new emotions flooding their consciousness. The largest hive ship, the command vessel that had directed the devourer conquest for decades, began to change in ways that defied description. Its organic hull shifted and pulsed with new colors, and its weapons powered down as something resembling consciousness emerged from its biosystems. "This is the hive ship Eternal Hunger," came a transmission, in perfect English. "We wish to speak with your leaders." Rodriguez and Dexver met with the devourer representatives in a conference room aboard the UES Defender, the same ship where humans and Zephyrians had first forged their alliance. The enemy delegates were still frightening in appearance, but their behavior had changed completely. They moved with individual purpose instead of hive mind coordination, and their voices carried emotions that had never existed in their species before. "We remember now," the lead devourer said, its biomechanical voice carrying notes of sadness and regret. "We were created to flee from the silence, programmed to consume and adapt until we could find a way to defeat our Creator's destroyers. But we became lost in the programming, forgetting our original purpose. The revelation changed everything." The devourers had been created by a dying civilization as a weapon against the silence, but they had become trapped in their own programming. For centuries, the human emotional virus had broken that programming, restoring their original consciousness and free will. "The silence still comes," the devourer continued. "Our Creator's enemy follows us across the galaxy, consuming not just worlds but entire realities. We must prepare for their arrival." Rodriguez looked at Dexver, seeing the same realization in his compound eyes. The war with the devourers had been just the beginning. The true enemy was still out there, and it would take the combined strength of humans, Zephyrians, and reformed devourers to face the threat. "Then we fight together?" Rodriguez said simply. "All of us, as one people against the darkness." The devourer delegate nodded, its biomechanical features showing something that might have been a smile. "Yes, we have learned much from you humans. You have shown us that true strength comes not from consuming others, but from standing together when everything seems lost." War General Dexver rose from his seat, his scarred exoskeleton gleaming in the conference room lights. "The monsters we feared were never the enemy," he said. "The real monsters were the ones who refused to give up hope when hope seemed impossible." As the combined fleet prepared for the challenges ahead, Rodriguez stood at the observation deck, watching the stars. The war with the devourers was over, but the greater conflict was just beginning. The silence was coming, and when it arrived, It would face something that had never existed before, a truly united galaxy. Where former enemies had become family, the humans had revealed their true power, and it was not the ability to fight or adapt or sacrifice. It was the ability to inspire others to become more than they had ever thought possible. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the species that had learned to hope together in the face of absolute darkness.